Well, with respect to opportunities for actuaries in the Society of Actuaries, or just perhaps in general, it's hard to say. I'm kind of a seize the opportunity kind of a guy. So you have to consider opportunities that may become available. And by way of an example, actuaries are, the core principle about being an actuary is managing, measuring the financial consequences of risk. Risk is a core part of what actuaries do. So I think when you're looking for future opportunities, you have to look for risk in the future and technologies that provide some opportunities to better manage risk. And the one I can think of, and one I've worked on in the past, is genetics. Genetics have a natural connection with life and mortality risk. There's a great deal of development in that field. And it's kind of mathematical. There's a DNA code, and the code can be related through experience studies to various diseases or behaviors. So there's some measurement possibilities there. But it's not as simple as it sounds, because the DNA structure of an individual is not prescriptive. It's somewhat determinative, but it's not prescriptive, because there are other factors that play a role. Broadly, that those factors are referred to as epigenetics, things outside of the genetic code that can affect the way genes express themselves, what turns them on, what turns them off. So I think there's a field of study there that actuaries can get involved in that actually relates to risk, life and health risk, and perhaps other risks as well. And it's a challenging opportunity. It used to be very expensive to do genetic studies. It's still somewhat expensive, but it's come down quite a bit, and it's possible to do enough genetic research that there's experience data that can be used. So I think it's areas like that. That's just one example. I think the SOA is monitoring these things, and I think it has to keep an ear to what new ways to evaluate risk exist. And I think there's incredible opportunities in genetics. Well, okay, I think the strategic plan has a mission statement. Mission statement is something along the lines of the role of the Society of Actuaries is to educate actuaries and do research such that actuaries are enabled to measure and manage the financial consequences of risk. And I think that that's a core principle of what an actuary is, and so it has to be the most important part of the strategic plan, that mission statement. In fact, it's so important that it's kind of redundantly covered in a number of different places in the strategic plan. I think if we forget that, then we've lost our profession. So that basic mission statement, the definition of what actuaries are, the core of what it means to be an actuary, must be addressed constantly. Okay, so InsurTech, AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, those questions are being asked as if that's all new stuff, and it's not. InsurTech is another word for disruptive technologies. They've been around for a long time. When I started as an actuary, I did my work on Marchant mechanical calculators. use a Frieden calculator to do square roots mechanically. Moved up to electronic calculators without gears and wheels. They were electronic, but they were on your desk. To PCs. And PCs, we started, well, actually, even before PCs, there were small computers that actuaries can buy for actuarial departments, programmed in APL. They used 8-inch floppy disks. Went from 8-inch floppy disks to 5¼ inch floppy disks to 3½ inch floppy disks, and then to no floppy disks at all. CDs for a while, USBs. Now we have the cloud, Dropbox. You can attach files to email. So those are disruptive technologies that in the past have helped actuaries do their job. Now I'm sure there are going to be disruptive technologies in the future as well. If I knew what they were, I wouldn't be running for president. I'd be starting a company. But I think we can't be too enamored of this. Let's talk about artificial intelligence. I think as long as you're referring to it as artificial intelligence, it's not a threat. It's not an opportunity. I think we should apply the Turing test. I think it's a Turing test. If you're talking to somebody and you can't tell whether it's man or machine, if that ever happens, then I think actuaries have a challenge, because you may have found a machine that could do your job. A lot of this stuff has potential. Even though it has potential, it may not work. Just a small part of it will work. And even that disruptive technology that works may not be useful for a lot of reasons. For example, telematics is the word used to describe using information gathered from a car's diagnostic port to price auto insurance products. So theoretically, good drivers get better rates than bad drivers. Well, that's not new technology. Progressive insurance company patented that technology in late 1990s, early 2000s. They had 3 or 4 or 5 patents. And other companies have patents on that too, dating from the same era. So that technology is 20 years old. So why hasn't it succeeded? It's been tested, but it hasn't really caught on. Now I would, I drive like an old man. I'd love to have a auto insurance premium based on how I drive and how often I drive. But I haven't been offered that. And I think the reason is that those kinds of technologies create other problems. Just as genetics may, or not may, but does, but this does too, because if you read those patents that Progressive filed and see all the data they can collect on you, or would intend to collect on you, you'd be a little frightened. You'd have some privacy concerns, because maybe you don't want anybody to know where you park your car at 2 a.m. or how fast you go, related to the speed limit. So, the technologies have potential, but there are conflicting privacy issues, maybe social concerns that may prevent them from being successful. So, I think if we knew how future disruptive technology would affect the actuarial profession, we wouldn't have to monitor it. And we monitor it precisely so that we're aware of what's going on and we can make decisions on a current basis. With respect to how does the SOA engage with young professionals, and by that I understand the question to be relating to younger members of the actuarial profession, new entrants. And the concern is that I guess they're not, they grew up in a different era than I did and my compatriots did. I joined the actuarial profession because of influences I experienced from fraternity brothers when I was in college. And we all went to work for, when we graduated, we all went to work for Continental Assurance Company in Chicago. And we worked there first as summer students, part-time, and eventually, when we graduated, got full-time jobs. Well, you know, I think, I guess life was simpler then. We didn't have cell phones or, as I mentioned earlier, computers. We didn't have all those diversions. We had to, you know, we had to find our own kind of fun. And it existed within the work environment as well. We created the Actuarial Summer Student Awards at CA, Continental Assurance Company. You know, the coveted, we call them the coveted ASS Awards. And we had fun. We spent, you know, hours in somebody's cubicle talking about the best tie that somebody was wearing. And you know, went to racetrack outings, and we had, you know, we had events outside of work. It just wasn't all work. We knew how to have fun. And I certainly get the impression in talking to younger actuaries I deal with now that you know, maybe because they grew up in a different environment, they're not fun-loving. They don't see humor in things. They're all business. They're focused on work and I assume family. But it's hard to distract them from that. So I don't know whether actuarial work has become more competitive or they feel less secure or what. But I think there must be one or two among them who do volunteer, who do participate more broadly in the profession. And perhaps the thing to do is to ask them why. Ask them what caused them to do that. What rules of young professionals did they break in doing that? And the other thing I think we can consider is in some way to disrupt them. You know, we're talking about technology disrupting the profession. Well, maybe we ought to try and find a way to disrupt young professionals who are not naturally inclined to participate more broadly in their profession. So we have to find some way to, I think, disrupt them. And maybe, you know, when I was a young actuary, when I was deciding what SOA meeting to go to, I looked at the place it was in first, and the material it covered second. It was more important to me to go out on an adventure to Denver or to New York City or to Miami or someplace that I thought when I was younger was exotic. I'm not sure I would want to go to those places anymore, but you know, maybe one way to attract and to disrupt how young professionals behave is to create, you know, maybe a somewhat different meeting structure. Maybe you have, you know, because they've probably done a lot more travel and you know, coming to Chicago is not that exciting for them anymore. But maybe, you know, you have smaller elite meetings, the first 100. They have to be smaller because of the places we would choose to have them. We can have meetings in Telluride, Jackson Hole, Key West, you know, someplace that might excite young professionals to come and perhaps involve them a little bit more in the profession. And of course, they have to be interesting meetings, and there'd be diverting activities, you know, skiing and surfing and stuff like that. But I don't have an answer right now, but I think we can find one. Okay, the international market and the SOA's goal to expand within it. And I think that the SOA recognizes that is difficult. I think if you read the strategic plan, you can see that the SOA understands the obvious, that well over 75%, maybe 85% of our members are North American. They speak English, maybe some speak French, but those who speak French probably speak English as well. They live in 4 time zones. They live in the same, generally the same culture. They have the same, or at least closely related attitudes, and the risk structures are pretty much the same. Now, by international, I think we're talking principally, Asia, although we have members from 80 countries. But Asia seems to be the big expanse of area. Now, Asia is halfway around the world. It's in a different time zone, so it's dark here when it's light there. They speak different languages. They have different culture, a different insurance environment, different risk environment. They're concerned about different things. So that in and of itself makes it difficult. Now, I think the SOA and the strategic plan recognizes that difficulty, and so they're emphasizing working through local actuarial organizations. And so I think that's probably the best way to go about it, because you can't expect, I don't know whether the SOA wants to start a 24-hour hotline or anything like that, so that when somebody from Asia or Australia or New Zealand calls and wants to check on their status with respect to dues, that there'll be somebody here to answer that call. I think that would be very expensive to do, and wouldn't necessarily be as productive as having those members relate to a local association and have the Society of Actuaries relate to that association to promote the profession in that area and provide support to members through their local association. So I think, I think we're doing that, but I think that needs to be continued. The other thing I think probably needs to be addressed is, we don't do a cost-benefit analysis of what our participation in the international market with respect to membership is all about. And that's not to say that if the costs exceed the benefits to the SOA that we should stop it, but we should at least understand where we're spending our money and what we're getting for it. And I think we may find that money spent dealing with local associations is better spent than trying to deal with individual members. Why should members vote for me? Well, the obvious is that I've been practicing as an actuary for 50 years. I've had many different employers, stock and life mutual companies. For the last 18 years or so, I've been an independent consultant. So as an actuary, I've dealt with a lot of people who are not actuaries. And I've learned how to deal with them, and I know what they're expecting of actuaries. I think that's important to understand where your profession stands within the world in which you work. So I have those experiences. Now, I think obviously the SOA is focusing on disruption and insurtech and AI and all those things. And so they recognize that the profession has to be aware of those things, has to be aware of disruptive technologies and disruptive thought processes to succeed. And I don't think anyone would argue that I'm not disruptive, at least willing to challenge the status quo and the way things are being done. Not necessarily because I want to change it, but because I think it needs to be questioned. And I think that you really can't improve yourself unless you question what you're doing now and successfully defend it or adapt and change to something better. I think you have to do that. If you don't, you'll die. Adaptation is the key to success, and you don't adapt unless you question what you're doing.